Before Alan Alda became one of the most respected figures in entertainment, he was simply another working actor trying to make a name for himself. That all changed in 1972 when he stepped into the boots of Captain Benjamin Franklin Hawkeye Pierce on unmatched, a role that would not only redefine his career, but reshape television history. But here's the twist. Alda didn't just play the lead. He quietly rewrote the rules of what TV could be. unmatched wasn't supposed to be groundbreaking. It was based on a hit movie, yes, but expectations for the show were modest. The pilot didn't explode, and executives weren't sure how long it would last. But Alda saw potential, and he pushed hard behind the scenes to steer it in a new direction. The war comedy wasn't just funny. It was biting, emotional, and at times, heartbreakingly real. And a huge part of that came from Alda's influence. Early on, Alda made it clear he wanted the show to say something. He insisted that episodes respect the brutal reality of war. While others might have been satisfied playing it for laughs, Alda fought to explore the emotional cost soldiers faced long before trauma became a regular part of TV storytelling. He brought a moral compass to the script, pushing boundaries with themes about mental health, bureaucracy, and loss. And his control didn't stop at acting. Alda eventually wrote and directed over 30 episodes, more than anyone else on the show. His fingerprints were everywhere. His goal wasn't just to entertain, but to make the audience think. One week he'd have you laughing, the next sitting in stunned silence. Then came the finale. Goodbye, farewell, and amen. The 1983 final episode of unmatched became the most-watched television event in American history. Over 105 million viewers tuned in, more than any Super Bowl or scripted drama before or since. Alda didn't just star in it. He co-wrote and directed it, turning what could have been a formulaic send-off into an emotional juggernaut that critics still analyze to this day. The episode wasn't just an ending. It was a full-circle moment that captured everything the show had become: bold, human, unafraid. But here's what most people miss. Alda didn't do this by chasing fame or applause. He did it because he believed TV could be more than background noise. He believed it could be personal, political, profound, and that belief helped transform a weekly wartime sitcom into one of the most powerful cultural touchpoints of the 20th century. That kind of impact is rare, and it was only the beginning, because as the world clapped for Hawkeye, Alda had already set his sights on something even deeper, something that would take him far beyond the Korean War tent and into battles even more personal. While millions knew Alan Alda as the witty, fast-talking Hawkeye from unmatched, few realized that the real man behind the role was living a far more complex and often painful story. Behind the smiles and sharp one-liners was someone shaped by early hardship, private struggles, and a deeply rooted sense of responsibility. What most fans didn't see was Alda's fierce drive to make a difference far beyond the camera. And it all started long before Hollywood came calling. Alan Alda was born into a world of entertainment. His father was a singer and actor, often on the vaudeville circuit. But Alda's early life wasn't glamorous. It was marked by instability. At just 7 years old, he contracted polio, a disease that left many children of the time permanently disabled. For months, he was confined to bed, his muscles weak, his future uncertain. His recovery was painful and slow, aided by a new therapy method that involved stretching and strengthening limbs, a process young Alan had to endure daily with his parents' help. That early fight gave him something most kids never had to develop so young: grit. But the real trauma came not from his illness, but from his family. Alda's mother suffered from undiagnosed schizophrenia, a condition that plunged their home into chaos. He's spoken about moments of intense confusion and fear, times when her episodes would erupt without warning. One minute, she was laughing, the next convinced that people were out to get her. As a child, Alda never fully understood what was happening, but the instability left a permanent mark. He learned early on to read people, to stay emotionally flexible, and, most importantly, to use humor as both shield and sword. These early wounds shaped Alda's later passion for activism. In the 1970s, while many male celebrities avoided social issues altogether, Alda took a stand on something few others dared touch: women's rights. He became one of the most visible male advocates for the Equal Rights Amendment, appearing at rallies, giving interviews, and even co-chairing campaigns within First Lady Betty Ford. Some called it risky. Others called it career suicide. But Alda didn't flinch. He believed in equality, not just as a political issue, but as a personal one. "I wasn't being courageous," he once said. "I just didn't think it was right to stay silent." He often pointed back to his mother and the women he'd worked with over the years, talented, overlooked, and too often dismissed. For Alda, it wasn't about being a male ally. It was about being human. Even as he became one of the most recognized faces on television, Alda never stopped using his platform to amplify issues he cared about. Whether it was mental health, science literacy, or civil rights, he brought the same integrity to real life that he brought to his characters. He wasn't just acting like a good person, he was doing the work. And that integrity would lead him to one of the most unexpected chapters of his life, where science, storytelling, and empathy would collide in a way no one saw coming. After conquering television and advocating for social justice, Alan Alda could have easily stepped back and settled into legendary status. But instead, he chose something wildly unexpected: science. Not playing a scientist, not narrating a documentary, actually becoming one of the most influential science communicators of the 21st century. It started in the early 90s when Alda was offered a hosting role on Scientific American Frontiers, a PBS series that explored the latest innovations in medicine, technology, and physics. For most actors, this would be a paycheck gig: show up, read a script, go home. But Alda had other ideas. He didn't just want to introduce experiments. He wanted to understand them. He asked real questions, challenged scientists to explain their work in plain English, and brought curiosity that made even the most complex ideas feel accessible. What made it work wasn't just the content. It was Alda's approach. He didn't pretend to be an expert. He played the role of the interested friend, the eager learner. He laughed when confused, asked the questions most people were too shy to ask, and never once talked down to the audience. In a world filled with dry science programming, he made discovery feel like a conversation, not a lecture. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Alda realized that scientists, despite their brilliance, often struggled to connect with the public. So he took it upon himself to fix that. In 2009, he co-founded the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science at Stony Brook University. The mission? Teach scientists how to tell their stories with emotion, clarity, and honesty. It wasn't about dumbing things down. It was about bringing humanity into the lab. The workshops he developed were unlike anything else in academia. Scientists were taught improvisation exercises, emotional connection, and storytelling techniques, all borrowed from Alda's decades in film and theater. And the results were profound. Researchers who once stumbled through jargon-heavy talks began captivating audiences. Doctors spoke more clearly to patients. Engineers explained risks and breakthroughs in ways the public could finally grasp. But Alda didn't stop there. In 2018, he launched the podcast Clear Plus Vivid, a title that summed up his philosophy. Communication should be simple, but rich. The show became a quiet sensation. He sat down with artists, scientists, world leaders, everyone from Yo-Yo Ma to Madeleine Albright to President Volodymyr Zelensky. The conversations weren't puff pieces. They were deep dives into what makes people tick. And Alda's listening skills? Razor sharp, even as he faced health challenges. And we'll get to those in the next section. He continued recording, often from home, often between treatments. Because for Alda, connection isn't a hobby. It's a way of life. What makes this chapter so powerful isn't just what Alda did. It's why he did it. He wasn't trying to reinvent himself. He was following the same thread that had guided him since childhood: empathy, curiosity, and a relentless drive to understand the world. But behind all the interviews and breakthroughs, something darker was quietly taking shape. In July 2018, Alda sat down for a morning interview on national television and casually dropped a bombshell. He had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. What stunned viewers wasn't just the revelation itself. It was the way he delivered it. No tears, no drama, just Alda being Alda. Calm, honest, and still cracking jokes. "I've had a full life," he said with a half smile. "This is just another part of it." But beneath that calm exterior was a quiet war, a battle Alda had been fighting privately for years. The diagnosis had come 3 years earlier. He was 79. At first, the signs were small: a twitch in his thumb, a subtle tremor in his hand. But Alda's instincts, honed over decades of reading people and bodies, knew something was off. He went to a neurologist and asked to be tested, not because he was afraid, but because he wanted to know. And he wasn't wrong. Parkinson's is a progressive neurological disorder that slowly attacks movement, balance, and coordination. There's no cure. For most people, it means a lifetime of shrinking possibilities. But Alda didn't flinch. In fact, he leaned in. He publicly shared his diagnosis, not for sympathy, but for clarity. He wanted to show people what living with Parkinson's could look like. And here's where it gets even more Alda. He didn't hide it. He danced. Literally. He took boxing classes and Tai Chi. He studied movement like it was another role, trying to understand how to keep his body in motion while everything inside him tried to shut it down. "I act out my symptoms," he joked. "If I'm shaking, I pretend I'm excited. If I stumble, I pretend I'm meant to." But it wasn't all laughs. He faced moments of deep frustration, especially when his speech began to change. For someone who had made a career out of connecting with people through words and tone, the thought of losing that was terrifying. But again, Alda adapted. He learned vocal techniques, practiced breathing. He continued podcasting. He never let the illness write his story. In fact, one of the most powerful things Alda ever said about his diagnosis was this: "It's a part of my life, but it's not the whole story." And that's the truth. Alda never let the disease define him. He used his platform to raise awareness without slipping into victimhood. He showed millions that living with Parkinson's doesn't mean giving up your identity, your purpose, or your joy. Even as his body betrayed him, his spirit sharpened. His humor stayed intact. His work ethic never faded. He showed up again and again with clarity, purpose, and heart. And as the world watched him age with courage, another part of Alda's legacy began to come into focus. Because while he'd already changed television, fought for equality, and redefined science communication, there was still one final act that would surprise even his biggest fans. By the time Alda reached his 80s, he had already accomplished more than most people could in 10 lifetimes. Iconic roles, Emmy wins, humanitarian honors, best-selling books, and a reputation as one of the most beloved figures in American culture. But instead of basking in applause, Alda made a different choice. He didn't want to be remembered for what he did. He wanted to be remembered for why he did it. For Alda, legacy was never about fame, it was about meaning. That shift didn't happen overnight. It grew slowly, quietly, in the spaces between interviews and appearances. As Parkinson's began to affect his body, he grew more reflective. What was the point of all this recognition? What was worth leaving behind? So he started writing, not just scripts or memoirs, but essays, deep, honest reflections on aging, connection, fear, and grace. In interviews, he became more open about regret, vulnerability, and the things he still struggled to understand. He wasn't building a statue of himself. He was opening a window, and through that window, millions saw something rare, a public figure willing to evolve out loud. What made this final act so powerful wasn't just what Alda said, it was how he said it. There was no preachiness, no ego, just a man older now, standing in the truth of his own experience. He talked about aging not as a tragedy, but as a transformation. He spoke about illness not as defeat, but as revelation. And he kept returning to one word: connection. That idea of truly connecting with people became the through line of his legacy. Whether it was through acting, activism, or science, Alda saw communication as the key to everything: understanding, empathy, progress. And as the world grew more divided, more distracted, his voice felt like a lighthouse. Steady, compassionate, human. He also never stopped challenging the idea that older actors had nothing new to say. Instead of retiring quietly, he took roles that mirrored his reality: flawed, aging, complex characters like in The Good Fight and Marriage Story. These weren't cameos. They were statements. Aging isn't an exit, it's an evolution. And behind the scenes, he poured his energy into teaching, mentoring young scientists, coaching storytellers, guiding nonprofits. He didn't just talk about legacy. He built it brick by brick. One of his final public comments about legacy was simple, almost offhand. "If I'm remembered for anything," he said, "I'd like it to be that I help people communicate a little better, that I help them listen." No grand finale, no curtain call, just a quiet, lasting imprint. Alan Alda didn't end his career with a mic drop. He ended it with a hand extended. But here's the thing. Even with all his achievements, battles, and reinventions, one lingering question remains. How did he stay so grounded in an industry known for chewing people up? In a business built on self-promotion and applause, Alan Alda remains something of an anomaly. A man who could command a room without needing to dominate it, who could lead without ever making it about himself. For decades, fans tried to figure out the secret behind his long-lasting career, his emotional strength, and the fact that, even in the most chaotic times, he never seemed to lose his sense of purpose. But the truth wasn't flashy. It was simple. Alda's resilience came from a quiet, deeply personal philosophy. Stay curious, stay kind, and keep showing up. Unlike many stars who crumble under the pressure of fame or go off the rails when their spotlight dims, Alda kept evolving. Not because he feared irrelevance, but because he loved learning. Curiosity wasn't a brand for him. It was a way of life. Whether he was questioning a Nobel Prize, winning physicist, rehearsing a new stage play, or talking with a janitor backstage, he treated each interaction with equal interest. That mindset kept him fresh in an industry that feeds on burnout. But even more powerful than his curiosity was his complete lack of ego. While many actors' age grew bitter about changing roles or younger competition, Alda welcomed it. He was never obsessed with being the star. He just wanted to do good work and leave people better than he found them. That's why so many of his collaborators speak about him with genuine warmth, not just respect. Directors didn't just love hiring him for talent. They loved having him on set because he made everyone better. That attitude came from years of internal discipline. Alda spent most of his life observing people, asking questions, and resisting the urge to control everything. He wasn't chasing perfection. He was seeking connection. Even in moments of crisis, like during his Parkinson's diagnosis, he focused not on what he was losing, but on what he could still offer. In one interview, he said something that sums it up perfectly. Stuff happens, but you still get to choose what story you tell yourself about it. That's the Alda code in a single line. Life doesn't spare you pain or chaos, but it does give you a chance to respond with grace. And he always did. Even more incredible, he never used hardship as a brand. There were no viral moments of Alda breaking down or making dramatic speeches about resilience. He lived it quietly, humbly, authentically. And that's the real legacy, not the awards, not the roles, not even the activism. It's the proof that you could be successful without selling your soul, compassionate without being naive, and strong without needing to overpower anyone else. In a world obsessed with image and noise, Alan Alda offered something infinitely more valuable: substance. But what's most surprising, Even after decades in the spotlight, his final message wasn't about looking back. It was about what comes next. When you look back at Alan Alda's life, it's tempting to pin him down to just one title: actor, activist, teacher, icon. But none of those labels quite capture what he truly represents. Because Alda didn't just exist in the spotlight. He transformed it. He used his platform to challenge norms, uplift voices, and most of all, to connect with people in a way that felt deeply personal, even across a screen. What makes his legacy stand out isn't the longevity, it's the intention. Every chapter of his life had purpose. Whether it was playing Hawkeye Pierce and injecting empathy into a wartime satire, standing up for women's rights during decades when it was controversial, or helping scientists become better storytellers, Alda never stopped asking one simple question: how can I make this moment more human? And that's why his story matters more now than ever. In a time where outrage grabs headlines and authenticity feels rare, Alda's quiet consistency hits differently. He didn't chase trends. He didn't need to go viral. He made an impact by showing up again and again with empathy, curiosity, and an open mind. He reminded us that fame doesn't have to change you, that aging isn't a curse, that illness doesn't mean invisibility, and that listening, really listening, is a radical act of connection. But here's the part that most people miss. Alda didn't need to keep working into his 80s. He didn't have to speak out about Parkinson's, or build a center for science communication, or launch a podcast in his late 70s. He could have retired years ago, quietly and comfortably. But he didn't. Why? Because Alan Alda believed he still had more to give. More stories to hear. More people to uplift. More meaning to create. His message wasn't just for actors or scientists. It was for everyone. You don't have to be a celebrity to lead with heart. You don't need a platform to make someone feel seen. And you don't have to have all the answers to ask better questions. So whether you first met him through MASH*, stumbled on his podcast, or heard about his work in science education, one thing is clear. Alan Alda didn't just change television. He changed the way people think, and feel, and connect. He showed us that strength isn't loud. That wisdom isn't about being the smartest person in the room, but the most present. And that the most powerful legacy isn't written in awards, it's written in how you made people feel. So as the spotlight slowly fades, one thing is certain. Alan Alda's voice will echo far beyond the screen. Because in the end, it wasn't about the fame. It was about us. And the stories we're still brave enough to share.